great to see you. Thank you for joining us today. I have 6 questions that I wanted to ask you about your painting that you did on site at Parinacota Volcano in the north of Chile. So the first one, it's kind of a bit of a contextualized question. For your ice and fire journey that you did between 1996 and 1997, you studied volcanoes in many different states, active, dormant, in Montserrat, in Hawaii, in the Andes, in the Cascades Range, and in California. We know that Stephen Sparks recommended that you paint Parinacota Volcano from the Chilean side for this newer journey, exploring beauty. How do you feel about Parinacota yourself, about this volcano yourself, and what to you makes it beautiful?
Well, I suppose my first response when Steve, by the way, is Sir Stephen Sparks now. He was knighted.
Wow.
3 years ago. So he's now on the Queen's top list, and deservedly so. He's one of the world's great volcanologists, and a very good man. Anyhow, so when I invited him to suggest the world's most beautiful volcano, when he said Parinacota, I thought, oh no, I've already painted that one. And he said, oh well, no, wait a minute, because I said, can't you nominate a different one? And he said, well, which side did you paint it from? And I said, oh well, from the Bolivian side. And he said, oh no, I'm talking about the Chilean side. That's where it's really beautiful. And so in the end, I was committed to go all the way back to Chile to paint the other side of the volcano. So at first I thought, oh, God, what a task to have to perform. But I must admit that Steve was right, that the volcano looks far better on the Chilean side. Because it's got that wonderful, because it's got that fantastically beautiful lake in front of it. And so you get this perfect reflection. And of course, with the classic volcanoes, I suppose Fuji would probably claim, the Japanese would certainly claim Fuji is the most beautiful volcano in the world. And of course, that too has got reflections in water and is a perfect cone, snow, just as Parinacota is. So I suppose those two probably would take top prize, really, if you were to have a beauty contest. But I mean, I found lots of volcanoes are very beautiful. Mount Baker, for example, in the Cascades, is absolutely exquisite, but not a classic pointed cone.
Yeah.
And I found very beautiful things about the volcanoes in Hawaii, but of course that's because of the excitement of them exploding all the time, which I found gave me quite a charge. So they're beautiful. I suppose in a way I've always, throughout my working life, I've always been seeking beauty, really, or trying to find beauty in whatever subject I was working on. So I suppose I always managed to find it one way or another. Otherwise, I probably paint it. I don't try to paint things that are ugly, really.
Yeah, it sounds like it's relative as well, right? I mean, people can see beauty in the Hawaiian volcanoes, like you were saying, even if they don't have that symmetrical classic cone. They're still beautiful in other ways. And for me, it's interesting that Mount Fuji, like you were saying, and Parinacota both have that similar aesthetic, but Parinacota is way less well known. People have never heard of that volcano, whereas Mount Fuji is iconic, right?
Right. And in a way, I'm glad he didn't say Mount Fuji, because it'd be very hard to do anything that was anything like as good as Hokusai. And so I didn't feel, at least I was pitting myself against one of the greats of Japanese art.
Well, great. Thank you. So the next question is, why do you have the particular selection of souvenirs in this painting, the elements at the bottom of your artwork? And what is sealed inside the 2 little parchment packages? Why are these secret?
Well, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, the souvenirs for this particular painting are simply some studies of feathers and of flamingo feathers, very beautiful things, of course. And of course, the lake did have lots of flamingos in it, so that was very notable. I didn't realize before I got there that flamingos enjoyed living at that kind of altitude. although I suppose I had seen them in Bolivia, come to think of it, but not quite as high as that. And so I did a study of some flamingo feathers that I picked up, and that's straightforward. But if you think I'm going to tell you what was in the secret packets on the internet, you think I'm going to put it out on the internet, you must be crazy. I'm not going to say, well, why would I seal them up to be secret in a packet and then tell you what they are?
Everyone who comes to see that painting has that question.
Well,
I think that's
the only way you can answer it is to take the painting apart and tear the thing out and put it up and have a look. Otherwise, you'll never know.
I love it. No, that's great. I think it definitely adds an air of mystery to the painting that people find really enchanting. No, that's great. So I didn't mention earlier that I got to travel with you on this trip, and I remember being struck by the flamingos as well. There were just so many of them at 15,000 feet. It seemed pretty incredible to me. To something that I picture being more tropical and something like in the Caribbean was all the way up in the mountains. So that was very striking for sure.
And ibis as well, if you remember.
Yeah.
Too. And just to see those up there, it's just, I mean, I suppose there were some coots and there were some geese, and I suppose you might have expected that would be something that they would be adapted to that kind of altitude. But to see those two species up there was just astonishing to me. Yeah. And to see that sort of color up in that very arid, dry, not really colored place, but it's a very severe place. Yeah. And to see there's a real flash of glamour, really.
Yeah. I remember specifically when they would take off as a flock, and that you just see this kind of cloud of pink with black wings, flying across the lake in front of this incredible volcano. Like, that was just such an iconic scene for me.
Yeah, it was extraordinary. I agree.
All right. So give us some impressions of the Altiplano Plateau in the high desert. Specifically, we're interested in when you visited back in 1997, the first time that you painted Parinacota, and then the second time in 2015. And did anything strike you, or any differences that you noticed between back then and then this more recent time?
Well, it's a bit difficult to compare the two, really, because the Altiplano on the Bolivian side is lower than we were up when I was painting Parinacota.
Oh. Okay.
And it didn't seem quite so dry, I thought, on the Bolivian side. The vegetation, there was more vegetation, but also, of course, it was absolutely dead flat, or appeared to be more or less flat anyway. The Altiplano itself, before you get onto the volcanoes, either side of where we were, it was there's a huge plain, really. Yeah. Very, very sparsely populated with people living with the Aymara people living in very primitive, not primitive, well, yes, some of the conditions were quite primitive, really, they were living in. And they had little tiny houses and farms. Well, no, the farms were huge, actually, in order to sustain flocks of llamas.
Like, so the terrain was huge.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the area that the llamas would just wander about all over, although they all belong to specific people, of course. And they would feed the llamas and they would look after them. And so I would say that on the Chilean side, it seemed much drier, and so much the vegetation was much more sparse.
One thing I wanted to point out as well that I noticed from being on the Chilean side was when we were at Lakechungara looking at the volcano, it was unfortunate to see all of this jettisoned garbage right along the road, right along the border of the lake. Not something I was expecting to see in a national park.
What we should have taken into account was that, when we were thinking about it, was that where we were going to be working was, very close to the route that Bolivia has through to the coast and through to the port.
Yeah.
And so the Bolivian border was not far away, and that is the main lorry route through. And of course, a lot of that stuff was just tossed out of lorries. Lorry drivers just chucked it out as they went through.
Yeah.
And I remember when we first arrived there, how all of our hearts absolutely sank, didn't they? I mean, we just thought, oh, God, this is just awful. Yeah. and I couldn't think what the hell I could possibly do that would be worthwhile. But then when we started poking around, we found what I thought was an exquisite site, actually. I mean, it was well below the road and a good distance away from it, and on a little spit of land that sort of poked out into the lake.
Yeah.
And lorry drivers obviously didn't get there, and so they hadn't, nobody had left a mess. And in fact, it was pretty pristine, if you remember where I was camping.
Yeah.
And there was that beautiful sculpted rocks in the foreground, which are a lovely kind of pinky ochre color, which was just beautiful and made a fantastic foreground.
Yeah.
And then those little bits of scrubby bushes and things you could make into something to enliven the foreground a little. And so if you remember, I went down there, I went, wow, this is absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
And I could camp there without being spotted by anybody, because I was sheltered behind, I was quite a distance from the road and sheltered behind some hills.
Yeah.
And so nobody ever noticed that I was there. And so I was perfectly happy camping there, and it was, as far as I was concerned, my little patch was pristine.
Yeah. No,
so I wasn't deliberately missing out the rubbish. It's just that it was where I happened to be sitting.
No, but you're right too. The rocks contrast so nicely, and if you look at the painting too, the color contrast is really nice. You have those rocks, and then the lake, and then all the way in the background, just this looming mountain.
Yeah.
So it was really an ideal site, and I think it captured.
I cheered up once I found it, because if you remember, just before that, I was absolutely despondent. I thought, oh my God, we've come all this way. What the hell am I supposed to do with this?
And it hailed. I think it hailed on us, and it was snowing, and it was just kind of miserable. Not being able to find a good site, having the weather not be agreeable, being hungry and cold. You just, at some point, you feel like giving up. But luckily, we found that site, and then everything went up from there.
Into place. But I don't know if you remember, but I seem to think that we were looking for somewhere just to have lunch, weren't we? And there was a driving blizzard coming in, and we sat sheltering behind a wall or something, didn't we?
Yeah. It was like
and had a cup of tea and cheered up, and then sort of went and looked around for a painting site, which we found, and then we went down a couple of thousand feet, or 1,500 feet, didn't we, to that abandoned village.
It was the town of Parinacota. It's also the name of the volcano. Yeah.
And we pitched our we sat there looking miserable for a little while, waiting for the blizzard to stop, and then we pitched our tents and then went for a hike, I think, and then the next morning went back up, and you guys helped me get all my stuff to my painting site, and I didn't pitch my tent then, I just started work, but and then you went off and did some hiking and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you guys camped further down in the village, and I stayed where I was. So it worked pretty well. I mean, it was bloody miserable, but it was
it was cold.
It was cold. It was miserable, but I mean, cold most of the time. But then, looking through my notes, I realised that that it was absolutely blazing hot sometimes. It was absolutely blistering
in the middle of the day.
Yeah, it was up at 85 degrees or something, and very, very high. The sun is very high altitude, so the sun is very fierce.
Yeah.
And baking hot, and then about 2 o'clock every day, I would see the clouds building up behind Parinacota, and I could see the storm developing, and every day there was a storm about between 2 and 3 o'clock. Would start, and I'd have to go and shelter in my tent while the lightning and thunder cracked around, and the hailstones came whipping down, and then that would stop usually about 5 o'clock, and I would go out, but by then it would be bitterly cold. It was really cold, and I'd paint for about another hour and a half, and then sit, feeling really sorry for myself, sit and eat and cook my miserable dehydrated supper, and then crawl into my tent and try and sleep, I guess, until dawn. But it was pretty grim, really, I got to say.
Tony, I have one more question for you. This one's more about the luminary. So the luminaries are the people who nominated each of the different locations that you went and painted for Exploring Beauty. I was curious if you could talk a little bit more about Sir Stephen Sparks. You've mentioned he's a geologist, but you know, who is he to you, and what is his professional background, if you have some insights? And has he gotten a chance to see the Parinacota artwork? Does he feel like you've achieved the goal of capturing this beautiful volcano? Basically, can you speak about that?
Yeah, I'll certainly talk a little about it. I mean, I don't know Steve Sparks very well. I wouldn't call him a bosom buddy. Although, funnily enough, I emailed him today because I hadn't realised he'd been knighted and I'd missed it. And I thought I ought to look and see what Steve's doing. So I Googled him and I thought, oh my God, he's been knighted, and I never even acknowledged it. So I sent him an email today saying, you know, this is a couple of years late, but,
Wow.
but congratulations, I'm so pleased, and very well deserved. Anyway, he emailed straight back, and we had a nice exchange. So that was nice.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so I first met him when I was doing the volcano series, of course, and I knew he was a world-renowned volcanologist and a professor at Bristol University. And so I emailed him, or no, I wrote him a letter, I suppose, probably in those days, asked him if I could talk to him about volcanoes and, you know, my approach to them. And he wrote back and said, or maybe phoned, I can't remember, and said, well, look, I'm just going off to Montserrat, which is just, I'm leading I'm in charge of the volcano observatory on Montserrat, which at that time had just erupted. It was before it erupted, very shortly before, it was still pronounced as dormant. And nobody suspected it was ever going to erupt. And then suddenly, and of course, this was really interesting for volcanologists because, you know, I wouldn't say they called it wrong, but they just weren't expecting it. And so he had put together a team because Montserrat is, I think, a British protectorate, I think. And so he said, would you like to come to Montserrat and work with us? And so, of course, you know, yes, I'd love to. So I jumped on a plane and went to Montserrat and I wouldn't say it became an official part of the volcano observatory, but certainly they gave me a desk and a notice board, and so every day they would put their findings up and I'd put my findings up. So I put my pictures and so I would get to travel with the volcanologists in all the areas which were completely off limits, really. And they were great to be with. I mean, because of course their perspective was completely different from mine. But there was sometimes I would say, look, if you could just leave me here for the day, then they say, okay, that's fine. I'll pick you up at 6 o'clock, and it would be across, you know, completely blasted landscape. And I would just sit there and work for the day or whatever I was working on. And then one day they said we're going to fly up to the crater today, and there are earthquakes every 20 minutes. There's an earthquake, and so can you do anything in 20 minutes? Because you can come up with this if you like to, and the helicopter. So I said, well, I've never tried, but yes, of course. So I took my sketchbook and my little paint box and all my bits that I needed, and so this helicopter, they take the doors off the helicopter so we can all see out properly and so on. And the pilot was just extraordinary. You turn it on one side so you could, you know, you're leaning right out over the crater, and then turn it the other side so the person on the other side could see. And this whole thing was blasting away. And then they landed us right on the edge of the crater.
Yeah.
And the scientists were looking for volcanic bombs, which are rock which are blown from deep within the volcano, and they slice them up. They with a sort of bacon slicer, they slice them into incredibly thin, so they can analyze them, and then they know something about the power of the volcano from the depth in which it's hurling.
I see. Yeah.
And I'm sure they found all sorts of other things too. Anyway, they were out collecting volcanic bombs. They wanted nice fresh ones. And I was standing painting. And anyway, after about 18 minutes, somebody shouted, "Tony, back in the helicopter!" So jumped back in the helicopter and as it took off, you could see everything beginning to
No
yeah,
way.
rocks falling in and rocks coming out. It was just an
Wow.
like being in an amazing firework display. I mean, it was just extraordinary. And so that seemed to me a real privilege, I must say. And how could you not keep up with someone who had presented you with such a wonderful privilege? And then he got in touch with the volcanologists in Hawaii on my behalf and said, this guy Tony Foster, he's doing some interesting things, so if he comes to talk to you, give him some time. And so the volcanologists then in Hawaii were also very helpful and took me in their helicopter to the edge of a crater.
Wow.
And so the paintings that I got in Hawaii really were all thanks to them.
Yeah.
And they were just a wonderful source of information and help and so on. So Steve has been pretty important in my life, really, and at least particularly in that show, obviously. And so when I talked to him about Parinacota, you asked whether he thought I'd caught it pretty well. Well, he came to the opening of the exhibition at the Royal Watercolour Society. Yeah. He came up and said, this is
that's it.
It's really nice. You've done a super job. I think just exactly what I wanted to see you and anything. And so we've had a very amicable relationship for many years now.
Really neat to have that background. Thank you. That's great.
Yeah, very interesting man. But I've always been very fortunate with the scientists that I've worked with. I mean, there's something about, I'm not sure whether it's because they're sort of intrigued by the way I approach things as opposed to the way they approach things. One of my great friends was Bill Brace, who was the director of the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences at MIT. Traveled with many times. And another was Winslow Briggs, who was the director of the Carnegie Institute of Plant Biology at Stanford. And these people are people I've traveled with, lived with, shared their houses, dined many times. And we're just great friends. And it's a real privilege, I think.
I think that's it for the questions that we have for this painting. Thank you again for your time, and I look forward to catching up more in future.
No, not at all. And I got to say, of course, that one great thing about the way I work, which probably isn't common to all artists, is that when I'm traveling, I need traveling companions who I can rely on, who are dependable, because in some cases you are trusting your life to these people. And I was delighted that you have reached that benchmark, because I mean we've traveled together twice now, and it's always been a thing of enormous value to me that people are prepared to give up a part of their life to come and spend time on a sort of creative adventure, and so without people like you and my many friends who've traveled with me in the past, over the past, nearly 45 years, I guess, none of these paintings would have been made. So, don't dismiss your role in the operation, because especially you're such a great speaker of Chilean Spanish.
That's helpful. So, no, it's been great. Thank you, Tony.